Thanks to depictions like the 1987 hit film Harry and the Hendersons, we tend to limit Sasquatch sightings to the dense rainforest of the Pacific Northwest. But with over 27.8 million hectares of forest in and around the Great Lakes, could this not make for a perfect Bigfoot vacation destination? In this episode, we deviate from the topic of surfing to investigate whether or not Sasquatch might be watching you while you're surfing at those heavily wooded surf spots around the Great Lakes. We chat with Olin Fruetel of Great Lakes Sasquatch about Great Lakes sightings, his own personal experiences, common threads across encounters, the trauma and recovery process of seeing a Sasquatch, surfing Sasquatch, and Sasquatch theories, including the idea that Sasquatch are waiting for COVID-19 to destroy the human race so that they may roam more freely. This episode was recorded on December 9th, 2020. It is family friendly with minimal swearing, but no F-bomb. Olin, welcome to Permastoked. How's it going, bro?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Right on, man. Nice to have you here. So where am I talking to you from?
So I'm from Minnesota.
Whereabouts in that state?
I live kind of like right in the dead center of it, like right in the middle, right between where the North Woods and the Great Plains like kind of meet.
Okay, cool. So, you're talking to a Canadian here. So what's the terrain like where you're based?
So like the north and east part of the state, kind of along north of Lake Superior there. It's a lot of like forest, stuff like that. It's like basically right where the Canadian Shield starts with all the, the rock formation and all that stuff. And then the central part of the state, it's kind of like there's trees and there's some hills and some wetlands and stuff. And then it kind of transitions the farther south and west you go in the state. The more flat it gets and the treeless it gets, and it starts turning into plains.
So, we're here, we're going to dive into Sasquatch in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of set the tone a little bit, kind of understand, what your surroundings look like. So before you tell us, about Great Lakes Sasquatch and all this, I kind of want to understand a bit, like, how did you grow up? I understand that you've spent a lot of time in the bush, probably, it sounds like maybe not thinking about Sasquatch and things, like this was something that sort of came to you later. So walk us through what that looks like.
All right. So as I said, I grew up in like the central part of Minnesota, so out in the rural area. I grew up kind of like doing a lot of farm work and stuff, and just lived a pretty simple existence, really. And for hobbies, I really liked fishing, hunting, camping, four-wheeling, all that sort of stuff. And then on my own, I really liked to go out and do bushcraft kind of stuff. So when I was younger, when I was like a teenager and in my 20s, I really liked going out on solo camping trips and just like kind of getting off the trail and doing all this basically like bushcraft and solo camping. And I never really thought about Sasquatch. If the subject ever came up, I was just kind of indifferent to it, didn't think about it much. My opinion was pretty much that it was just kind of a joke. It was something people used to sell beef jerky and stuff like that.
What changed your mind about Sasquatch?
So when I was 26 years old, I was up north with my wife and her family, and we're doing a four-wheeling trip. So we weren't really like that deep in the woods or anything. We were up in a state forest, but it wasn't really that remote, And we had been there throughout the weekend doing four-wheeling and stuff. And then we always like to take like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to stay a little bit longer, because usually all the weekend people are gone then. Everybody's got to go back to their jobs and whatnot. So we'll stay a couple extra days and we kind of have the place to ourselves. And we were camping, and most people had gone to bed. It was like 1 a.m. There was only 4 of us sitting out by the fire. And that would have been myself, my wife, her mom, and then a family friend of ours. And we were just chilling by the fire, just chit-chatting. And There's like crickets, frogs. This was like in June, so there's a lot of noise out in the woods at the time, and even like barred owls and all that stuff.
So just to be transparent, were you drinking?
I was not. My wife and her mom, they had a few drinks, but they weren't even close to being hammered or anything.
Okay, because I'm sure that comes up. Like I'm sure people ask you that, so I wanted to. Just
I get that all the time. A lot of times I tell them, if you start seeing apes when you're drunk, you'd start seeing them at the bars too. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys are sitting out at the fire, chit chatting.
Yeah, and then it just got really quiet all of a sudden, and it was just dead calm. It was kind of a weird feeling, and then we heard this just loud vocalization, and it's really hard to describe. Like, with like a wolf or like another animal, I could like mimic it for you. This I can't even attempt to replicate it. So, but the best way I can describe it is like a howl and just like screaming, and it was incredibly loud. I had a huge lung capacity, and it sounded very like ape-like. And everybody in the group was, that was the consensus. It was really loud and it was ape-like. And after this lasted like 30 seconds or so, and I was just belting this out, and everybody starts looking at me thinking like I know what that is, so they look at me, and I have not a clue. My mind is kind of like racing trying to find an answer, and I just couldn't come up with one.
And so you've been in the bush before, and you'd heard coyotes and wolves and bears and things like this.
Oh yeah. Yep. Like ever since I was a kid, I've spent so much time up in the North Woods. It's just, this is unlike anything I've ever heard, plus way louder than anything I heard.
So you would have recognized if it were something familiar, but this was out of the ordinary.
Oh yeah, way out of the ordinary. Okay. And at that point, I still wasn't like, I wasn't just like, that's Sasquatch, I was just really confused about it. And when we went home, I hopped on the internet and I started trying to figure out what it was. So I started by going to the Department of Natural Resource website, and I looked up all the mammals and all the birds and everything I could and started listening to them. There wasn't anything coming close. And the farther and farther I started Googling stuff, I came across Sasquatch vocalizations on YouTube, right? And so I clicked on it just for the heck of it, and I started hearing things that were very similar to what I heard. And
so before you clicked on it, what was your initial thought when you saw, Sasquatch vocalizations? Were you like, come on, you kidding me? Like, I'll just
a little bit
this, or were you actually considering that this could be a Sasquatch?
For the most part, I was just kind of entertaining the idea, but I was kind of running out of ideas of what it could be. So I just went for it. And after I found those two, I showed my wife, I showed her mom and her family friend, and they were getting like goosebumps when I showed it to them, and they were like, that's what we heard. And so I started going in like the comment section of videos like that and started asking, okay, what is this really? And nobody had an answer other than Sasquatch. That's pretty much what led me up to, at least I was kind of 50-50 at that point. I was open to the idea of it, but I still wasn't, quite there.
So what made you a believer?
Well, it was probably 2 months later, we went back to the same place. And at that point, I had looked at a bunch of Bigfoot stuff, so I started getting an idea of what people do when they go out and look for them. And kind of almost as a half-hearted joke, I did like a tree knock, like you see people do on TV. And it was like we just sat and listened, and about a good minute later, something knocked back to us. And then that bumped me up even a little bit more. And then the following year, went back to the same place, and I had a couple of buddies from work with me. They weren't on board with that kind of stuff. I didn't really talk about it much with them.
Yeah.
But when we were camping there, it was in the same forest, but we were at a different campsite this time, right off the lake. And while we were sitting at the fire that night, we started having rocks tossed into camp at us. And it started with just like just little ones, and they were kind of whizzing in. They'd come in sideways, so it's not like an acorn dropping out of a tree or anything. Like you could hear the rocks. They're like, nicking branches on the way through, and they're landing in camp. And then we start hearing some hit the water. And then later in the night, we start hearing the big ones getting chucked into the water. Big, there's a sound a fish makes when it splashes in the water or something. This was like a kerplunk, from a big rock getting tossed in. And then at that point, I was pretty much sold on it. I didn't really, question it anymore after that.
So, just because, there's going to be lots of skeptics, I'm sure, listening to this, I have to ask all those questions. So what was the proximity of other people there possibly? Was there other campsites around, or were you completely isolated?
Yeah, we were completely isolated. This spot we picked specifically to get away from people, and it was right on the edge of a remote lake.
Are they all close to where it happened the first time?
It was within probably like 2.5 miles. So it was in the same forest, but about a mile or a couple miles apart.
Okay, so the rock throwing, this sort of sealed the deal for you that there's Sasquatch out there.
Yeah, that's probably the point where I started just kind of okay, these things are real. And more things happened after that too. So, that's not where it ended either. It was on that same trip, and we went on this backside of this trail. It's not this place is pretty remote too. There's not a lot of traffic that goes on this trail. It's like an ATV trail, but we used it as a hiking trail, which you can do here. It's just if you hear four-wheelers coming, you just hop off the trail quick. And we got back to this remote location, and then we started finding structures. And I'm not even the one who noticed them first. My buddy from work was. And he's like, man, look at all these trees. They're all stacked up in pyramids and stuff. And then there's these perfect breaks. Not like if wind or something takes down a tree where the bark's all splintered. It was just something took its wrist and gave it a twist and broke it. But they were 2 inches thick. So I tried breaking one myself. I couldn't even come close to doing it.
Good, yeah. So these branches, they were creating some kind of shelter, you're saying?
I don't know if it's a shelter. I'm not sure what they are, but I've seen a lot of other videos of them. They might just be Sasquatch road signs. That's what a lot of people think they are. That they're just kind of little, almost like if you were going to go cut through the bush or something like that, you would leave a little nick on trees as you go along, or break little twigs that you could find your way back, or just a primitive sign maybe.
Okay, so the theory is that these are markers of some kind.
Right.
And now what about the very traditional footprint? Is that something you'd ever seen out there?
I did find one footprint. It was right next to a structure that I found. There was a lot of leaf litter on the ground. So it was like a carpet of leaf litter, but it was a deep imprint in the ground. It probably went down maybe 3 inches or so. It was huge. I wear a size 14 boot, and and I'm wearing thermal boots, so they're even bigger. And this thing was way bigger than my boot print.
Wow.
And it sunk down. I used all my weight. I'm about 230 pounds, and I couldn't even get my foot to sink in an inch. And this was really deep. So whatever it was, I had really big feet, and it was heavy.
How far would you say it compressed down? 2 or 3 inches or something?
Yeah, at least double the depth that my foot could do. So, and it's bigger surface area. So if it had the same size foot as me, and I'm 230, so if it was 460 pounds, it would take 460 pounds to make that kind of depth, but its foot was even bigger, so it might even be heavier than that,
So your buddies from work, what are they thinking at this point? Are they on board, or do they think you're a whack job?
No, not at all. They, they did kind of at first, but they're not at 100% there. they're kind of probably like 50-50 too, where they definitely entertain the idea and feel that it's very possible, but I think they're kind of, they need to actually like see one to totally believe.
I mean, at this point, would you want to see one, in all honesty? Or do you think you'd freak you right out? Or
I think it would freak me out. I've talked to quite a few witnesses, and a lot of them have said they wish that they wouldn't have seen one. They say it's the creepiest dang thing on the planet. It's not very fun, I guess. And I don't really go out seeking them too much. And the whole point of Great Lake Sasquatch was not to like prove their existence, because like that's not going to happen. You know, it's okay, so there's evidence like the footprint casts, and people find the structures, stuff like that. There's even like some caught on film, but they're usually blurry. I mean, you could have the most perfect video of one and someone will just call it CGI, you know. In the modern age, there's too much people can do with computers and stuff like that, that I'm like, even when I see like something that looks kind of convincing, I'm like, you know, somebody could have made that on, you know, Microsoft, you know, Paint or whatever. So
you literally have to have one in a cage and see it in person, I think, to really.
There's a famous Bigfoot researcher. Well, he wasn't really he was a Bigfoot researcher, but he was I believe it was Grover Krantz. He was a professor of anthropology. I think it was at Washington State University. I could be wrong on that, but he, he was a doctor in anthropology. He said the only way people are going to believe it is if you drag a corpse into town and you have to rub people's faces in it.
Yeah, I would think so.
So, yeah, but the whole point's not to prove they're real, because there's going to be people that don't believe in it. There's going to be people that think I'm crazy. That's fine. I kind of feel like I'm a little crazy too. The whole point of this is you kind of go through a whole process once you start realizing that these things are out there. And especially people that have seen them, there's some people that get like PTSD from seeing these things. And there's not really a support network for that. You can't go to the therapist and tell them you saw an 8-foot tall monkey man out in the woods. They're going to lock you up. So the whole point of my organization was I went through this process and I kind of wanted to just help other people through it. That's basically the whole point of it. It's like let people kind of get over the fact that, you know, they saw this thing, and, you know, kind of almost go through the grieving process, you know, of their reality changing, and then trying to just leave people in a better spot than what they were before they contacted me.
This is amazing. I hadn't really thought about this aspect of Sasquatch, but it's like a support group, because you're right. I mean, you see people on television who say they've seen Sasquatch or seen aliens. A lot of people, you know, don't believe them. And then they're just left with this experience without the chance to really debrief or be heard and believed. So that is really cool, man. So what inspired you to, you know, take up that mission?
It was kind of my own experience, because I kind of I couldn't stop thinking about it once the stuff started happening. I thought about it I wake up and start thinking about it.
Yeah.
And it's just like your brain trying to wrap your mind around all of it, because it's something that's not supposed to exist. And even talking about it, you sound crazy to a majority of people. And you know, I'm well aware of that. Some people, you know, they don't have as thick a skin as me, so they could probably use somebody in their corner to work them through it a little bit, I guess. Some of the people I bumped into and talked about it, I could tell it affected them deeply. Kind of felt bad for them.
So Great Lake Sasquatch. So now, how come you attached the words Great Lakes on there? Are you sort of limiting your, you know, geographical region to the Great Lakes, or do you extend this invitation to anybody?
Yeah, I'll talk to anybody. If somebody contacts me, I'm not going to turn them away. The reason why I focused on the Great Lakes region is because kind of in that Sasquatch community, there's a ton of groups, organizations, and stuff on the West Coast, obviously, like in the Pacific Northwest. And there's a ton of groups that are down in the southern United States and stuff too. But it kind of seems like this region right in the middle of the continent, around the Great Lakes. Like, it just kind of gets overlooked, but there is a ton of wilderness up here. And I think people just are a little quieter about that kind of stuff in this area of the continent. So, and I wanted to hear about more stories from kind of like my region. So I always, I usually, I started out, or it's just like the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and then Western Ontario and Manitoba.
So the reason I reached out to you, was because Great Lakes Sasquatch, that fascinated me. This is a surf podcast, primarily catered a lot to the Great Lakes surfing crowd, which, similar to Sasquatch, is something that a lot of people don't believe exists or that you can do, is surfing on the Great Lakes. So I was previously living in British Columbia, and there's a place there, maybe you've heard of it, it's called Harrison Hot Springs. And it's right on a park called Sasquatch Provincial Park. And so it's the real hotspot for sightings in that area. And so, it's got the stores with the Sasquatch statue inside and, all those kind of things you see on TV. But I actually went on an ATV tour. There's a company there called, I think, Sasquatch Country Adventures or something. And they actually take you out in the woods on a quad. And the guy, our tour guide, he was actually pointing out spots where there had been sightings, where he had his sighting. It was really fascinating. So I definitely associated Sasquatch with British Columbia, Oregon, and Washington. So the fact that you've created this Great Lakes idea, I think, is just awesome. Because also me living here too, and I'm sure the surfers listening, especially the guys out on Superior, if you're out in those woods and you're all alone, and you kind of get that feeling like, is something watching me, or is there something out there? So what are the common threads that you've heard with Sasquatch stories, particularly in the Great Lakes?
People tend to, they're always huge, way bigger than a bear. This part of the continent, we don't have grizzly bears. We have black bears. And if people are saying they're seeing something that's 8-9 feet tall sometimes, and it looks like it's 3 times wider than a human, and it's walking on 2 feet, it's not a bear. It seems like they can be curious. People with kids will have an encounter. I think they get curious about all the children making noise and stuff like that. I had a woman, she emailed me probably 2 months ago, and she was up in northern Minnesota. She was probably only about 20 miles away from the Canadian border. And her and her family, they rented a cabin up there that was on a remote lake. She said they rented the cabin because she has a son with mental disability. And so he makes a lot of noise, and they like to take their vacation somewhere, where he can make all the noise he wants, and he's not, going to upset any neighbors or anything. Mm-hmm. And she said he was, making a bunch of noise and stuff. And she said it was getting kind of dark, but she watched a huge outline of a hulking man. She said it was built like a bodybuilder at 8 feet tall, and it walks out of the tree line, and she could see this big silhouette of it, and it stood there and it watched them for a while. And she said she tried running in and grabbing her husband so he could see it. And by the time she got back with him, that it was already gone. So a lot of curiosity. So usually when people have sightings, it's not necessarily, it's like an accident. Sometimes it happens where people just bump into them. And but sometimes, or a lot of times, out of curiosity, they kind of show up, they check them out, people have a glimpse of them, and then they leave.
What's interesting about what you said too is with bears, and I mean pretty much any kind of wildlife, maybe with the exception of some predators like cougars or something, the animals, they will flee with loud sounds, right? So the fact that the Sasquatch, this is an animal or something that is coming to the noise, that is very peculiar in itself.
All right. It is weird. Black bears, the wolves, anytime I've had a encounter with them, as soon as they catch wind of you, they're gone. You just see the hind end of them running away.
I've always been fascinated with cryptozoic creatures. I've always been interested in the idea of Sasquatch, aliens, the Loch Ness Monster, Ogopogo, these kind of things. In terms of the different around the world, we've heard of Wendigo and Yeti and Bigfoot and Sasquatch. Have you done any research around those other names? Like, do they all share a common thread to what we perceive in North America?
Yeah, South America, it's the Mwapwangwari or something like that, and you got the Yowie in Australia. In Russia, there's the Almas, and even in like Northern European myths, there's the trolls and stuff like that. People, the way that trolls are kind of depicted nowadays are a little bit different, but if you look at the original descriptions of them, they're very Sasquatch-like. They're kind of big, ugly humans that are covered in hair.
So, the big question too, I think, that everyone asks is, how could we have not got our finger on one of these things already?
This is always just theory, because we don't have anything proven. But there was a man named Lloyd Pye, and he had a really good theory about him. And it even goes along with anthropology that is kind of ever changing. They keep discovering more types of like pre-humans and relic hominids and stuff, like their bones. What Lloyd Pye thinks, like, since all these different like human-like creatures lived all at the same time, and us humans were kind of the nastiest ones. We're kind of like two-legged wolves, We're not that powerful by ourselves, but we got the brain power to work as a team and kind of take down any animal on the planet. Our ancestors are taking down woolly mammoths, and those things are huge. So we got the smarts to know how to do it. And the theory is, if there's other human-like creatures that exist that are, they're human like you, but they're like a different species of human, they're competition for food. They're going to be using the same resources as us, and we're gonna kill them. We're gonna go to war with them.
Okay.
And so the theory is that we killed a bunch of them, and then the ones we didn't kill, we drove so far deep into the wilderness that we couldn't keep up with them anymore. We couldn't get that far back because our skin is, we got like thin skin. If you try to go through the really deep bush, you're going to get all cut up, and it's really hard for us to maneuver through it. Maybe they're better at that than we are. So the theory is we drove them deep into the wilderness where we couldn't get to them. And then every once in a while nowadays, we bump into each other kind of at the boundaries of those areas.
I remember learning that, and I read this in a book as well, that I believe it was only as long ago as the early or mid 1800s when there were written accounts of these, hairy ape-like creatures posted in the newspaper, and as if it was no big deal. It was a little more normalized. And I suppose, back then, before we had all the media exposure we have now, maybe it was easier to believe stuff like that too, because we didn't know all what was out there. We hadn't been exposed to it all through the lens of our televisions or things like that.
Right. And nowadays there's this assumption that we've seen every square inch of land. That's not true. I mean, you lived in British Columbia. If you look at British Columbia from the sky, there's so much land out there, it's impossible to. They say that most of the Pacific Northwest hasn't been land surveyed. Most of it's been surveyed from the air.
Okay.
Because it's just too hard. It's too hard to cover it all on foot.
And one of the areas they were pointing out on the tour was this island. And they were saying that was a major dwelling place for the Sasquatch. And of course, most people have no reason to go to that island. It's very remote. It's in the middle of, a lake that's in the middle of the mountains. So I mean, you're right. Who knows what's going on over there? So why do you think it's so hard for regular people, even say yourself, before having this experience? Why are people so skeptical of not only just believing in Sasquatch, but like you said, believing that there could be other species that haven't been discovered yet? And I know that that's a fact because they're discovering things on like a daily basis in the ocean.
Right. I think it's no fault of their own. It's, I don't know, I guess like pop culture. And you grow up and you see Harry and the Hendersons. It's kind of a silly movie. It's a good movie. I enjoy it, but it's silly.
Yeah.
And then, the beef jerky commercials and just, it's always kind of portrayed as a joke. And so people just, through pop culture, they just feel like that, yeah, it was just kind of created to be like a silly little thing, like a hairy wild man out there. Even jokes or fiction, anything like that, it always starts with a grain of truth.
We live in a time where everything is so concrete and we think we know everything and we think reality is what we see. And it's like we're not open to the possibility that there could be things we don't know about yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that even comes down to like a personal level. Like, like even when you're 90 years old, you're still learning stuff.
Yeah.
You don't ever know anything. You just keep learning more and more, but there's never a finish line. There's always going to be more and more that you could know and learn. And yeah, people are really obsessed with, I'm not believing in anything unless it's proven by science. Well, science is very busy. It's not going to have time to prove everything, especially something that's been kind of turned into like kind of like a joke or whatever, but does have basis for having plausibility. They're not going to be putting research grant money into it because in the end it's kind of inconsequential. There's like what benefit would science have by proving Sasquatches were real?
How do you perceive Sasquatch? Do you see them as a benevolent creature? Maybe, you mentioned the fact that people sort of have this PTSD after seeing them. Do you think there might even be some kind of darkness or malevolence with them, or are they just another creature species like us, just doing their thing and wanting to be left alone?
When I first started, I thought they could be, it's an ape, but the more and more witnesses I talk to, they say, yeah, it could seem ape-like just because of the fact that it's covered in hair. But because it walks like us, they say people that have seen them say their faces look very human-like.
Really?
A little different than us, but I think they're, I don't know for sure either. I don't want to, don't quote me on this as fact. This is all opinion, but I think if they are something, they probably are like a different species of humans that are just, they stay away from us because we're dangerous to them.
There's lots of cultures that talk about there being giants, even from a Judeo-Christian perspective. In the Bible, there's talk about giants and things like that. So really fascinating. So when you think about a Sasquatch, do you picture the what was that, like the Patterson-Gimlin footage? Do you think that was the real deal?
I am leaning towards that it is the real deal, and it's for a few reasons. There was footprints associated with that video. They went and casted the footprints that were down on that dry riverbed. And then with advancements in technology, they've been able to stabilize it now, so it's not so jumpy and all over the place. It's stabilized, and they were able to, because there's different copies of the film. The original film exists in a bank safety deposit box, but there was a bunch of second generation copies that were floating around. And the more of those copies that they can, with computer technology nowadays, that they can overlay on each other, and then they can take out film artifacts from the copying process, the clearer and clearer of a picture they got. To me, it looks like there's muscle flex in the leg. I don't know how you're going to do that in 1967. Planet of the Apes came out around that time, and they had to put clothes on the apes because the costumes looked baggy. They didn't have like stretch fur like costumes or anything. And it looks like this skin is tight to the muscle, and you can see like muscle flex and stuff in the leg.
A breast too, I think.
Yep, and it had swaying breasts too. When it turned, that frame where it turns and looks at the camera, you can see the breast swing on it too.
So if it were a costume, that's not a detail that would likely make it into a costume.
Right, and I'm just having a hard time imagining two rodeo cowboys managing to throw together this suit that, Hollywood didn't even have the capability of making at the time.
I kind of wonder what, because in our generation, we've had that footage around our whole lives, right? So this has been a part of our culture our whole lives. I wonder what it would have been like to have seen that for the very first time, when that was coming on the television back in the 60s. Have you met anyone who's talked about that?
I've talked to an older guy. He had a sighting when he was 11 years old back in the 70s. And he hadn't ever seen that footage or anything. They didn't have TV at his house growing up, so he never caught like a TV show with it or anything. And he said when he saw the Sasquatch when he was 11 years old, that he just thought it was like a monster. Like he didn't know what else to call it. He said the one he saw was a female as well, and he said it was completely covered in hair, and he said it was so human-like it looked like the bearded lady from the circus or something.
You mentioned Harry and the Hendersons earlier. I gotta admit, whenever I think of Sasquatch, that's the vision that comes to my mind. Being tied down to the top of the station wagon and then, waking back up in the garage at night.
Right. Yeah, that movie is good, even though it's silly. A lot of people, like in the Sasquatch community, like kind of hate that movie because of like the kind of the jokey factor that it's turned Sasquatch into. But I don't know. It's a good movie. It's not bad. I'd rather watch that movie than some of the scary ones they try to make. The spooky ones they're too corny for me. I can't stand them. But the Harry and the Hendersons is good.
I'm curious to hear what you think about some of the theories that I've read are that it could be an alien creature, that it can be, other dimensional, sort of like a spirit guide or something like that. Do you have any thoughts around any of those ideas?
Oh, I'm not a genius, but there's a man who recorded some vocalizations in the 70s. His name is Ron Moorhead, and he this was in Northern California, I believe. And he said there was all these anomalies that would happen whenever these things would come around. Sometimes they'd see lights. He said he saw like a 3-foot long rod of like bluish white light float right through the woods past camp once. And he said sometimes it would sound, they were like in a shelter, like that they made out of logs. And he said at night sometimes it'd sound like they'd come into camp and they'd throw all these like big cans and like fuel cans and stuff around and make a whole bunch of noise. And then in the morning they would go out there and nothing had been touched. They thought, they were sure camp would be destroyed when they went out there and nothing was even moved. And in recent years, he came out with a book. It's called Quantum Bigfoot. And it kind of goes into the like quantum physics theories and stuff like that. If you look into that stuff a little bit, it's, with quantum physics, basically anything is possible. There's different layers to reality. Maybe we can only perceive this one that we're in, but there's other kind of like dimensions or realities that kind of exist on top of this one that we just can't pick up on.
Yeah.
And maybe thinks that these things are kind of almost like how the Native Americans talked about them. Like, they're physical forms, but they can move between this world and the spirit world. And maybe that relates to quantum physics. It's just their way of how they explained it, without the scientific jargon.
Yeah, is it really so hard to believe that something might be able to just get away before we ever find it? Especially when we're talking about it being in these super remote places, like you're saying, right? You literally need to just get thousands of people to join hands, and just comb the woods until you got to the sea or something, and, see what you sort of sifted out.
Yeah, maybe next time they do Hands Across America, they can look for Bigfoot at the same time, do a
Yeah,
two
yeah.
for one deal.
So what would satisfy you what would you call yourself? A Sasquatch enthusiast, a researcher? Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself a researcher. I don't even really give myself a label. I'm just a guy that, like, if you've seen Sasquatch or had something happen to you weird, because I'll talk to anyone that's had something weird happen, even if it's a UFO or something else weird happens out in the woods. I'd like to hear it because I find it interesting, and I'm willing to like listen to somebody, and I'm just a guy that'll listen to someone talk if they got a story or need someone to kind of get something off their chest.
yeah, you really got me thinking about this support idea. I had never thought about that there could be a need for, debriefing Sasquatch experiences. I think it's awesome that you're providing a listening ear and a voice for those people to talk about it. So what do you think is the future for Great Lakes Sasquatch? What do you hope to accomplish as the years go by?
I think I just want to continue what I'm doing as long as I'm helping somebody. If somebody gets off the phone with me and they feel better about the whole thing when they're done, then that's the main goal.
Okay.
I'm not selling t-shirts. I'm not making it. So basically all of this is just me donating my time for people, because I don't want to make any money off this.
It's funny how many images there are on the internet of Sasquatch on surfboards, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? Because I've seen a lot of pictures of them surfing. So
Yeah, I don't know why people have this obsession with them surfing, but yeah, that'd be pretty cool. It's funny you were talking about the beef jerky. I know because there's Jack Link's beef jerky. They have a commercial with Logan Landry. He's a professional surfer, and there's a video of him like teaching this Sasquatch how to surf.
that's awesome.
Yeah. Oh man. Now, I know you said that you're not out to prove that they exist or that they don't exist, but deep down in your heart, would you love the satisfaction of it being debunked and proven true? Or do you like living with that mystery and this sort of great debate? Because, I mean, let's face it, it's pretty fun to talk about.
It is. I think I'm okay with them remaining a mystery. I think they're better off that way anyways.
Yeah.
As soon as we everyone thought panda bears were just a myth and a legend, a long time ago, and it took them 60 years to finally get deep enough into the bamboo forest to find a panda.
Wow.
But the moment we found one, now they're in zoos.
And that's a good point you bring up, because imagine, going back a few hundred years, especially let's say, you were from, England, and then you go to Africa and you see a lion for the first time. I mean, that would blow your freaking mind. Even to see a moose in the woods today is like, whoa, it's so magical, right? I mean, is it that hard to believe that there could be a hairy, human type creature, that they have recovered bones of what might be a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch from, hundreds or thousands of years ago? I forget what they're called. Do you know the term?
No, but are you talking about the giant skeletons that have been dug up?
Yeah,
the Smithsonian took them, but now if you go on the internet and try to Google it, because I remember in books when I was a kid, it was these 12-foot tall skeletons sometimes. Sometimes they even found 16-foot tall. They're kind of human-like, but they're more robust and they're tall. And when I was a kid, it was always in books that, these were dug up. But if you try to go on the internet now and Google it, it's you'll get the Snopes or whatever. It says it was all an internet hoax. I don't know how it could be an internet hoax when I was reading about them in books when I was a kid.
Honestly, I think if I saw Sasquatch, I'd be way too freaked out. I'd be afraid of, yeah, what what it would do to me. Like, would it rattle me so bad that I would be wanting to tell everybody about it, but nobody would believe me? It's almost kind of better being a believer, but not having seen one, you know,
Right, and vice versa, where you didn't believe in them, and then all of a sudden you got one in front of you.
and
Now,
trying to explain that to people.
one thing a lot of people, a lot of witnesses say is like they're so big and intimidating that, yeah, they fear for their lives. They feel like if that thing wants to grab a hold of me, it could just wring me like a rag and twist me in half if it wanted to.
But have you ever heard of a fatality at the hands of a Sasquatch, apparently? Or
There's stories on the internet, but there's a lot of channels out there that are just trying to sell like Bigfoot stories, right?
yeah,
Because there's a market for it. Anyone I've ever talked to, though, it's usually most of the time it's they bump into one, or one's curious and they see each other and then they both go their separate ways, and that's the end of it. And even like having rocks tossed like at myself, I
yeah.
mean, if they wanted to, they could just huck a big rock at me from the dark outside of camp, hit me with a rock, take me out. I wouldn't know it hit me, but
Yeah, for sure.
they never threw a rock and hit me.
So do you think that that's their way of saying, like, get the hell out of here? Or is that them kind of throwing a rock at you to get your attention? Maybe, come over here, check out this rustle in the bush. Like, what was the vibe like in the air when that was happening?
I never got the I need to leave vibe, but I kind of got the like, hey, we're here and we're going to mess with you a little bit kind of vibe. And I don't know if they can, because a lot of people think, oh, that if you know about them, they're aware of that somehow. Like they know that you know about them. Because a lot of people say once you have one kind of encounter with them, it's a lot easier for more to happen.
Oh,
Which
okay.
just sounds like, delusions. But when
Yeah.
you have other people with you, it's hard to explain that away. Because other people aren't imagining the same thing you are. And I've always had people with me. I don't go out alone anymore. Not since the missing 411 stuff. Ever since that, I usually, if I don't do the solo camp anymore, I always go with at least one other person, and we don't wander off on our own anymore.
So this has really impacted your way of life in a way. You used to do this solo camping. You used to think that you knew everything, out in the woods, how to handle yourself.
Right.
And then this just created a whole nother reality for
Right. Yeah, Dad. And the main reason for it is, I don't know exactly what I'm dealing with here.
you.
Like when I was out alone, if I encountered a bear, I knew exactly what to do. If I encountered a wolf, I knew what to do. And most of the time, those animals are going to run away as soon as they see you anyways. That's 99.99% of encounters of bears and wolves is they hightail it out of there. They don't ever come to camp and toss rocks at you for fun. So I don't know if I'd want to be out there alone and see one either. I'd be out of there quick. I'd be packed up and leave. I might even not pack up. I might just leave.
Yeah, you just get the hell out of there fast. So you mentioned then that people call you and you talk to people who've had these experiences. So how does that work? If anyone's listening, and they've had an experience, or if anyone does have an experience, is there a phone number to call or an email for people to find you at, or how do you collect that data or stories?
Yeah, so I have an email, which is glsasquatch, which is all lowercase, all one word, no spaces or anything, glsasquatch@gmail.com. And that's usually where people can like first initially get a hold of me. Because if I'm busy or something like that, because I do have a job and everything.
Yeah.
This isn't my job. And I work a lot. I work nights and stuff like that. So people can email me, and I can, kind of get back to them when, I can. And then we talk a little bit on email. And then if they're comfortable with it and they want to, I either give them my number so they can call me, or if people don't want to give me their personal number, I have a Skype.
Right.
That I give them the address to, and then we have a Skype call. Plus that works pretty good with people that contact me from Canada. We don't have to, do an international call or anything. And yeah, pretty much just take it from there. We just talk. I don't go and publish anyone's story. I don't make money off of it. It's totally about the person, just having somebody, because that's the main thing too, is if you have an experience, you just want to tell somebody that's going to listen to you. A lot of people, though, they freak out, they run, and they go tell even a close friend or a family member, and then they get laughed at. And then all of a sudden they become the Bigfoot guy or something. And then, and nobody wants to be, catching hell from people. And all they're trying to do is like, just let somebody know.
Man, the parallels from Bigfoot to Great Lakes surfing is just hilarious, because growing up telling people I surfed the Great Lakes, it was the same thing. You can't surf the Great Lakes. You crazy? The waves aren't big enough. I can't imagine if I came home and said, "Oh, I saw a Sasquatch." Yeah, I wonder if Sasquatch have any, or have any concerns with this COVID-19 right now.
Yeah, who knows? There's a lot more people out camping and stuff now.
Yeah.
Every time I tried going camping or anything, it was just there was people everywhere this summer.
Wow.
Me and my wife went up to the North Shore in October, and we just wanted to go see the sights up there and see the fall colors and stuff. And oh, there were so many people around. I've never seen it so busy up in that part of the state.
Yeah, people gotta do the staycation now. But Sasquatch, they might be liking this COVID-19 kind of, culling the herd a little bit, maybe getting ready for the Sasquatch takeover.
Right. That's all. There's a lot of people that think that they're kind of laying low and just kind
Yeah,
of kicking back and waiting for us to destroy ourselves, so then they can just take the planet back from us.
yeah, really. Like, that doesn't seem that zany to think about. The Sasquatch seem to be hanging out a lot around the border. They're not concerned with international travel the way we are right now either.
I guess not. They got dual citizenship, I guess, and they can just hop the border whenever they feel like it.
So, before we wrap up here, is there anything that you want to say to, the skeptics out there? Like, do you have a message you want to drill home, or are you just like, believe what you want to believe, no harm done to me?
I guess what I would say is, yeah, like if you don't want to believe, it's really inconsequential if you believe or not. I have thick skin, so if you want to tell me I'm a loony, that's fine. Like, I can take it. But there's a lot of people out there that they've seen weird stuff, whether it's Sasquatch or other things. Just try not to be too harsh on people. Try to hear them out, especially if it's someone that you know really well and you're really close to them. They're not going to just decide one day to like tell you they believe in Sasquatch for no reason. They'll just give people a little bit of a break. You don't have to believe them, but at least just hear them out, because it's pretty tough going if something crazy happens to you and everybody just kind of laughs at you, and you got this serious kind of existential crisis going on with you.
Not really.
And just keep in mind too that there's over 10,000 Bigfoot reports and sightings that have happened since, like, pretty much since they started recording them, like after the Patterson-Gimlin film, and Bigfoot researchers and people started taking reports. So out of those 10,000 plus people, all it takes is for one of them. If one of them's telling the truth and not mistaken, then Sasquatch is real.
Yeah.
Even if 9,999 of those people are totally mistaken, they saw a bear, or they're just making it up and lying, or they saw someone pulling off a hoax, it only takes one person for it to be real.
I hadn't thought of it that way. You're right. And I like what you said, first of all, too, the message about, being kind to people who may have had this experience. I like that you expressed that goes even to something like this that you would never even think about, that's an issue, but actually is. And that keeps people quiet too. That's, just another, harboring shame. That's not cool. People need to be able to express this stuff. So I think it's really cool, man, that you've provided an avenue for people to do that. And for someone like me who's just really intrigued by this stuff, I think it's super cool, man, that you've created the Great Lakes Sasquatch to hear about these stories locally and not just out in BC or on the West Coast. Like, these things could be in our own backyard.
Yeah, and that's what, I'm in the U.S., but I wanted to hear from Canadians too, because there's people from Western Ontario and Manitoba. That's flyover country, just like I am down here in Minnesota. So we kind of get overlooked a little bit, but there's a lot of wilderness out here.
So when the sightings that you get or the experiences that you hear from people, are they generally more in America or sort of split between Canada and the US, or?
I would say I actually have more reports from Canada. Western Ontario seems to be like a hot spot. Western Ontario, and then into Manitoba, and I think it's because of there's huge expanse of wilderness, and there's a ton of lakes. Like we're sitting on the biggest source of fresh water like on the planet.
Yeah.
I think it's like 40% of the world's fresh water is in this region right here with the Great Lakes, and then plus the hundreds of thousands of lakes that stretch through Minnesota and then up into central Canada there.
I drove through there only a few months ago, and yeah, it's hours and hours and hours of traveling through what could only appears to be bush. And that's just what the road is going through. So there could be anything out there.
Right.
I think we'll leave it at that, man. I'm going to leave that with people. Anything could be out there, not even just Sasquatch. All right, dude. Well, hey, thanks for coming on the show. We took a little different, route than I normally do, usually talking to surfers and, musicians and things like that. But I thought it'd be so cool to learn about the Sasquatch that could be out on the Great Lakes and, even watching us when we go surfing, or according to the media, maybe they even go surfing themselves. I don't know. Maybe we'll discover that one day. So, dude, I thank you for coming on the show, Olin. Stay stoked, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me. I had a good time.
Right on. That's all for this episode of Permastoked. I hope you enjoyed listening to that one. Again, I want to say mahalo to Olin for coming on the show, sharing his knowledge and experiences related to Sasquatch on the Great Lakes, and for being vulnerable and opening up on a topic that a lot of people are going to think you're crazy for. So thanks, Olin, for coming on. It was awesome. And whether you believe him or not, I hope this Christmas and holiday season, you can at least take Olin's message of kindness and pour that friendliness onto everyone you come in contact with, regardless of their appearance, beliefs, and so on. There's too many kooks out there already, so don't be a kook and just bring more kindness into the world. That's what we need, especially during these times. If you want to connect with Olin, check him out on Facebook at Great Lakes Sasquatch. And from all of us at Freshwater Surf Goods and the Permastoked podcast, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a happy holiday season.